Hey, I'm Daniel Cox. I'm a private chef here in Bozeman and Big Sky, Montana, and I'm back today cooking a beef and onion soup using the truffle Charolais chuck roast. I'm going to top that soup with sourdough crostini with Dijon mustard, garlic butter, and Gruyere cheese. It's going to be delicious. Another incredible way to use this amazing beef. Stay with us. So to make this soup, what I'm going to start with is this beautiful Charolais chuck roast. I'm going to cut it into 1 inch by 1 inch cubes and coat it in a little bit of seasoned flour. I'm going to season the flour with salt, garlic powder, and black pepper. What that's going to do is as it cooks, it's going to create a little texture on the outside of the meat. But it's also, that flour that's in that cooking liquid is also going to slightly thicken the finished product, the beef and onion soup. So here I have 2 pounds of this beautiful truffle Charolais chuck roast. It's incredibly marbled, super flavorful, and like all Charolais beef, it's some of the most sought after beef in the world. And I'm cutting them up, you can see here, into 1 inch by 1 inch cubes. So once I've cut that beef up into 1 inch by 1 inch cubes, what I'm going to do is take this seasoned flour, garlic powder, salt, and black pepper, and I'm going to coat it on there. And just get each piece kind of tossed in that flour. And I'm going to take it into a hot skillet and brown each piece. I'm going to pull it out and then sweat or saute some leeks, carrots, celery with herbs and bay leaf. The beef is going to braise for 2 to 3 hours, and then that's going to be the base of our onion soup. So you want to start in a pan with a good amount of oil. It's probably about a 1/4 cup of oil in there for the 1.5 to 2 pounds of beef. The flour is going to really soak up a lot of that oil. You don't want to get any excess flour in there. Anything in the bottom of your bowl, keep in the bowl. Don't put that in the pan. We're going to brown up this beef. And what that's going to do is create a little bit of texture on the beef, but it's also going to slightly thicken up the finished product, the onion soup. Chuck roast is incredible. It's used in a lot of applications for pot roast, grinding it for burgers, any kind of stewing. It's by nature a bit of a tough meat. That's why you want to cook it for a while. The reason why you want to braise it instead of stew it is because I want color on that beef. Braising is covering that meat with liquid halfway up. In this case, we're going to use red wine beef stock, and we're going to cook it for about 2 to 3 hours on 350. We're going to leave it covered for the first half, and we're going to uncover it for the second half. And what you're going to get is a nice crust, a lot of color on the top of that braised meat. The reason why we don't want to stew it or boil it in the liquid is because you would lose a lot of that color, a lot of that flavor. While the beef is browning up in the pan with that flour and kind of caramelizing, what I'm going to do is prep the vegetables. So after the beef is done browning, I'm going to pull it out of the pan, and in that fat, I'm going to saute some leeks, some carrots, and celery with a couple cloves of garlic. The one thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, though, is leeks. You'll notice in this recipe, as a whole, I'm using 3 different types of onions. Leeks, which is a much more mild, fragrant onion, is much different than the red onion, which is a lot more spicy and sharp. And then I'm also using sweet onions in the soup to help balance that out. So what that's going to do is create a really great balance of flavor as a whole dish. Leeks, if you haven't used them before, are very dirty. So what I like to do is they come as a whole green, chop those greens off, discard them, or you can wash them and use them in vegetable stocks and things like that. What we're going to use is the bottom, the white part. We're going to take that root end off, and you'll see how much dirt hides in those leeks. So what I do is pull it apart, get it into some water, and get them really, really clean. Clean and wash all your vegetables, but leeks are one of the ones that get really, really dirty. So that's 1 leek's worth of dirt, and this is why you will really want to wash leeks thoroughly. They're a delicious onion, but they are pretty dirty, so make sure to wash your fruits and vegetables. So you can see that the beef, tossed in that flour, the salt, pepper, and garlic, has really browned up. It's starting to stick to the bottom of the pan, but that's incredible flavor. Let's get all that beef pulled out, and in that, all of that good beef fat, we're going to saute our leeks, garlic, carrots, and celery. So we're going to pull out this beef for now. We're going to add it back in here shortly. Don't wash out your pan. All of this good sticky caramelized meat and flour is really good flavor. It's called fond, and that's why we're going to also hit it with red wine and beef stock. It's going to pull all of that off the bottom of the pan. It's incredible flavor. We'll come right back to it with some vegetables. I keep them chunky because we're going to pull it out. This is not actually going to be in the final product, the onion soup. This is just for flavor on the beef as we're braising it. So I keep the carrots and the celery kind of chunky because we're going to want to pull the beef out or strain it out. And this will not end up in the final soup. One question that I can answer for you, and I get asked a lot, is how do I properly shuck garlic? What I do, and what I've watched most chefs do, is take the side of your knife and just gently smash the garlic, not to the point where you obliterate it, but just to the point where you can pull that skin right off. It should fall right off. And then you have fresh garlic that you can chop with your knife. What I wouldn't do is use what I call jarlic or jarred garlic. You just don't know how fresh that is, how long it's been sitting in that jar. You're going to get a lot more fragrance and flavor and health benefits from fresh garlic. So I've got the leeks, carrots, the garlic, and the celery sweating or sauteing just for about 4 or 5 minutes to start pulling out some of the flavor on those vegetables. I'm going to add into there a cinnamon stick, bay leaf, some whole sprig herbs, some sage, thyme, rosemary. Like I said before, we're going to be pulling all of this out of the braised beef. This isn't going to end up in the soup. So we're braising the beef, we're going to make the onion soup, and then we're going to marry them together and let them kind of cook together for a little while. But all of this can go in whole because we're going to be pulling it straight out. But so much flavor. It's incredibly fragrant. I'm going to throw that into those vegetables. I'm also going to put in there, with the herbs and the vegetables, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste and beef bouillon. Before we start adding liquid to the pan, I'm going to let the tomato paste and the bouillon also toast up in that hot oil. It's going to just bring out more flavor. After about 1 minute of putting those herbs, the tomato paste, and the bouillon, we're going to deglaze with red wine. Deglazing means to put liquid into a pan so that it gets all those nice crunchy bits off the bottom, what's called fond. It's all of the flour and the beef that's left over in the bottom of the pan is kind of stuck to the bottom. That's a ton of flavor. You want that in your braise. Once that comes to a boil, the alcohol is gone. And I'm going to add in 1 quart of beef stock. With that beef stock, I'm going to throw in a half a stick of butter, bring it to a boil. We're going to add the meat back in, cover it, and go into a 350-degree oven for about 2 hours. In the vein of a very traditional French onion soup, after the beef is braised, the onion soup is made, and we marry them together, we're going to let that cook together, the beef and the onion soup, for about a half an hour. When we're ready to eat, we're going to top it with a sourdough crostini. I'm going to toast that sourdough crostini in a butter of Dijon, garlic, and fresh herbs. I'm going to put that on top of the soup, cover it with Gruyere cheese, and let it bake in the oven individually in the bowls. It's going to be incredible. Right now, what I'm going to make for you is the garlic, Dijon, and fresh herb butter. So I'm going to take 3 cloves of fresh garlic, take off those root ends, and discard those. You can use your knife. You can also use a garlic press. I like to use a knife because I get more of the garlic. It doesn't get stuck in the garlic press. One trick when chopping garlic is take some kosher salt that you're using while you're cooking and put it in with that garlic. It acts as an abrasive to break down the garlic a little bit faster and a little bit more efficiently. It also helps so the garlic doesn't stick to your knife as much. So once that garlic is all nicely minced up, I'm going to add it to the butter. And for fresh herbs, I'm going to use chives, a little bit of sage, and rosemary. All of these recipes can be found attached to this video. So once we have this cooking liquid brought to a boil, it's ready to go in the oven. We're going to add back in the browned chuck meat. We're going to cover it and go into the oven. We're going to let that cook uncovered for about 2 hours. For the last half or the last third of the cook, we're going to uncover it and let it cook uncovered so it gets some browning on top of the braised meat. Great food is all about layering flavors. We could just toast this sourdough crostini in plain butter, or we can make a compound butter, which is just going to help layer the flavor on the finished dish. In this butter, I have herbs, chives, rosemary, and sage. I've also got 3 cloves of chopped garlic. I'm going to add a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and that's going to finish our flavored butter. All right, so there we have butter, Dijon, fresh herbs, and chopped garlic, and that's what we're going to toast the crostini in. It's going to be incredible. I'm going to toast this in that butter, 350 degrees for about 12 minutes until it's nice and toasty on both sides. I'm going to start the soup now. It's a pretty classic French onion soup. I like to use equal parts red and sweet onions. Sweet onions are going to bring a lot of sugar to the pot, and the red onions bring a lot of raw, spicy onion flavor. If you remember, I used leeks in the braising of the beef. So all of that's going to add layers of flavor and complexity to the dish. I'm going to julienne these, which means to go kind of against the grain here and cut it into thin strips. Once you have all your onions cut, I'm going to cook them down with equal parts butter and oil for about an hour over medium heat. I'm going to put a little bit of sugar in there to kind of help pull the natural sugars of the onion out and caramelize the onions. We're not going for a classic caramelized onion, but we do want the flavor that comes with the caramelizing of the sugars that are in the onion. A great trick when cutting onions is to use a sharp knife. The reason why you cry when you're cutting onions is because the dull knife is sending gases up. If you use a sharp knife, you won't have that problem. Over medium heat, I'm going to go in with a half a stick of butter and an equal amount of olive oil. The recipe called for more onions than the pot could hold, so I'm going to go ahead and put that butter and oil into a little bit of a bigger pot. And over medium heat, I'm going to let these onions cook down with 2 tablespoons of sugar for about an hour. You can't rush onion soup. Gotta let those sugars come out of the onions, gotta let them caramelize a little bit for that flavor to really build. So the beef has been braising for about 2 hours at 350 degrees. I just tasted a piece. It needs a little bit longer. It's starting to break down and get tender, but it needs probably about 45 minutes to another hour. I'm going to take the cover off so that anything that's exposed to the oven heat is going to start to caramelize and brown, and that's the beauty of braising over stewing and boiling in a pot. I'm going to take the cover off, let it go for another 45 minutes to an hour. So the chuck has been braising in that red wine with the cinnamon, the bay leaf, the herbs. I mean, the smell coming off of this right now is incredible. But it's been braising for about 2 hours and 45 minutes. You can see the color on top. That only comes from taking the lid off in the last 45 minutes to an hour. And I just tasted it, and it's really tender. Chuck needs time. It's not filet mignon. It's not a tender steak cut. It's a part of the shoulder, a lot of locomotion in that muscle. It needs time to break down. Similar to brisket, chuck needs time to really do its thing. But once it's done, it's one of the best cuts on the whole animal. What I'm going to do is pick the beef out of this and put it into our onions, which you can see have came down quite a way over the last 45 minutes or so. Good caramelization. Lots of good smells happening here. It's going to fill your kitchen up with incredible aroma. I'm going to take that beef, I'm going to put it in there, I'm going to strain the liquid, discard the carrots, the celery, all the herbs, and use that liquid in this with some additional beef stock. So we've cooked those onions down for about 45 minutes to an hour in butter and oil. We braised the beef for 2 to 3 hours. We've picked that beef out and combined it with the onions. What I'm going to do now is strain off all this beautiful cooking liquid. I want to get rid of those carrots, the cinnamon sticks, the bay leaves, the celery, and just be left with that really flavorful, very thick and viscous cooking liquid. It's going to help the texture and the overall mouthfeel of the soup, but it also is going to add a ton of flavor to it. So we'll strain that out, press everything through a strainer. In addition to that, I'm going to add 1 quart of low sodium beef stock. I like low sodium because I can always add salt. I can't take it away. So I'm going to work on straining out the cooking liquid. I'm going to add it to the pot. I'm going to put the pot back on the heat for about 30 minutes to really marry together all those flavors. So I've let the onion and beef soup simmer on the stovetop, medium-low heat, covered for about 30 minutes. I'm going to finish this whole process with some more chopped herbs, sage, thyme, and rosemary. And then I'm going to put that crostini on top, cover it with Gruyere cheese, and cook it in the oven for 5 minutes just to melt it all together. It's an awesome twist on a pretty classic dish, but I think you're going to really enjoy it. So to finish the soup, I'm going to chop some fresh rosemary, sage, and thyme. I'm going to taste it and re-season it with just a little salt and pepper if it needs it. Part of really great cooking is seasoning as you go. I seasoned the beef before I seared it. I seasoned the butter that's going on top of the crostini. Everything's been seasoned as I've been cooking, so taste it at the end. If it needs a little more salt and pepper, go ahead and add it. So I finished the soup with salt, pepper, season it as you go, but also taste it at the end and re-season as well. I finished it with chopped herbs just to bring that real bright, earthy flavor to it. And now we're going to plate it up. The crostini that I toasted in the Dijon butter with the garlic, herbs. Cut it down just to fit it in the bowl there. Gruyere cheese. I'm going to put this whole bowl in the oven for about 5 minutes just to melt that cheese, and we're ready to eat. Now be careful because it's going to be hot coming out of that oven, but that Gruyere is nice and toasty. I'm going to finish it with just a little bit of that butter on top. And let's give this soup a try. So you should be able to cut into that bread. Bring up some of that beef and onion. It's going to burn the roof of my mouth, but it's going to be worth it. It's as good as it gets. I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. This recipe uses beautiful De Brucker Charolais chuck. You can find all De Brucker Charolais meat at buydcmeat.com. Truly is some of the best beef in the world. Go get it now.